So Marvel used to have this really interesting imprint called The End, which featured the final stories of some of their most popular characters and teams. We covered comics legend and creator of Thanos Jim Starlin's foray into that label with Marvel The End on our in-depth and sort of comedic series called Back Issues. There, we covered the entire story, I pronounced an Egyptian pharaoh's name wrong, and Thanos ended existence. Again. But it got me thinking, what were some of the more weird takes on this concept? Let's get into it. Legendary comic book creator Peter David was tapped to tell the last Hulk story in Hulk The End. And you think the guy who invented the Maestro might focus on that cruel despot Hulk? Peter opted to tell a different story about Bruce Banner, the last living man on Earth. A wasteland devoid of human life, Banner walks the Earth, pestered by an emotionless camera chronicling his journey. At night, a wave of horrible insect monsters roll over the landscape and tear the Hulk apart, leaving his dead husk to regrow and reform and revert back into Bruce Banner. The whole thing's actually kind of depressing, but not without Peter David's masterful human deconstruction. Garth Ennis took a shot at the Punisher The End, which saw Frank Castle as one of the last survivors of World War III. Frank tortures and murders his way into the last bunker of human civilization, populated by entirely buffoonish caricatures of American politicians. In the end, Frank does what he does best and walks the irradiated wastelands before succumbing to spontaneous combustion. Yikes. If you're a fan of Dr. Strangelove, you will really enjoy that series. Wolverine The End was written by Paul Jenkins. At that time, Jenkins had also been tapped to tell his origin story, so it seemed almost poetic. This time, Wolverine is tormented by the astral ghost of Charles Xavier acting as his conscience as Logan limps his way to the truth about his origins. In the end, he learns of a long-lost brother who was actually alluded to by Jenkins in the original Origin series, and generally acts like an idiot most of the time. It has a few interesting ideas about the future of the X-Men, but it's ultimately less of a finale for Wolverine and more of just a really weird story featuring Wolverine. And speaking of X-Men, naturally Chris Claremont would be your ideal choice to wrap up their story, and maybe he took the job a little too seriously, because while some of the End series were between 1 and 6 issues, X-Men The End ended up being about a 6-issue trilogy totaling in about 18 issues, taking over 2 years to complete. Originally, X-Men The End was supposed to be a reteam of Chris Claremont and other Marvel Comics legend John Byrne, but after John Byrne left the company, Claremont was left to do the entire writing duties by himself. Ironically, while X-Men The End saw the deaths of nearly 50 beloved X-Men characters, the series simply would not end, elements of which continuing in Claremont's out-of-continuity X-Men series, Gen Next. My favorite story from The End, however, was Fantastic Four. Sure, there's a 6-issue miniseries by Alan Davis, but that's not what Marvel's first pick was. In fact, Marvel asked co-creator of the Fantastic Four himself, Stan Lee, to take a crack at it, though the Merry Marvel Man was unable to do so. We had a pretty standard send-off, but the fun part of the story is when Stan Lee came back and said yes. Rather than have 2 competing stories under the same label, Marvel opted to call Stan Lee's story The Last Fantastic Four story, which came out almost a full year after Davis's series. It's a lot of silly fun, but John Romita Jr.'s art does a really nice job of channeling that classic Kirby on some larger-than-life characters. The End label was revitalized in 2019, featuring a few more fan favorites including Captain America, Miles Morales, and Deadpool. Ultimately though, when you look back on the label as a whole, nothing really stands out as exceptional, which may explain why it's so rarely used. I have to say though, Marvel The End is one of the bigger ideas, and Jim Starlin actually wound up trying to weave it into actual continuity. But to learn more about that, you have to go check out our episode of Back Issues on it. So don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you guys here next time. Thanks a lot for watching.